in fact, that science is the only way we have to predict events in the physical world with any certainty at all. The press turned its back on this opportunity and its responsibility and went back to interviewing swamis. SIC Transit, SIC Transit, freedom of the press. The Amchitka business isn't the first disaster that has failed to materialize. There are always people willing to march through the streets with signs proclaiming doomsday. Some of them will even give you the exact day and hour of the impending cataclysm. They get rather flustered when the time passes and us nasty, sinful, pride-puffed, argumentative, aggressive human beings are still here. The advent of nuclear energy in the mid-1940s started a wave of gloomy, doomy forecasts. Hiroshima caught most scientists and all politicians and military men in a vast surprise. Obviously, warlike and bloodthirsty human beings would destroy themselves in short order with this too powerful weapon. Plenty of science fiction stories have used that theme. It hasn't happened yet. When you consider that World War I was triggered by the assassination of an archduke, and World War II's immediate excuse for starting was a quarrel over the free city of Danzig, think of the marvelous excuses we've had for starting World War III. There's been the Berlin blockade, Korea, the Hungarian rebellion, the Francis Gary Powers fiasco, the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam, and that's a heavily edited list. Without the awful threat of nuclear devastation, America and Russia would have cheerfully marched to war over any of these issues, with city-destroying hydrogen bombs. However, the war has been confined to words and brushfire fighting in the backwoods areas of the world. Disasters from overpopulation, famine, and pollution are popular nowadays. The actual facts from the real world, though, suggest that these forms of doom might not be living up to expectations. Population growth is showing signs of slowing in Latin America. In the United States, birth rate trends have already come close to the zero population growth figure. In so-called teeming Asian nations such as Japan and Formosa, population stability has been achieved. Everyone thinks of India and China when the specter of overpopulation is discussed. We know little about Red China's population programs. Oh, by the way, 1972 was the year during which Richard Nixon took a still historic trip to China and invited them out of the third world. But I digress. Where the hell was I? Okay. Everyone thinks of India and China when the specter of overpopulation is discussed. We know little about Red China's population programs. India has decided its real problem is education and is turning to direct broadcast communication satellites to beam educational information to every village on the subcontinent. The cost of putting a receiver and antenna in the villages, plus a few satellites in orbit, is within even the meager budget of India. Soon, the tradition-bound villagers will be treated to modern enlightenment on the subjects of birth control, farming methods, and presumably government propaganda. The Green Revolution is providing more foodstuffs for more people than ever before in the world's history. The harvest of 1971 was the largest reported in many years, and even the naturally cautious United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization is allowing itself a careful smile of optimism these days. Population and food problems are real and still very severe. They haven't been conquered yet, not by a long shot. Famine exists now and may well get worse in the future, but imminent worldwide starvation is nothing more than a scare tactic. a headline. The problems are solvable. So is the pollution problem. And now we're seeing the first slow, tentative steps in what's going to be a long battle against pollution. Against pollution, neither government nor industry has covered itself with glory in the pollution battle to date. But the battle has been joined. Even here, the doom criers are hurting themselves by overstating their case. Take DDT, for instance. Indiscriminate use of powerful insecticides can poison entire food chains. It is quite true. DDT has been found at shockingly high levels in plants and animals all over the world, even in the oceans and in Antarctica. Yet recent studies at Brookhaven National Laboratory have shown that the DDT levels found in food chain plants and animals is only about 0.03% of what would be expected based on the annual output of DDT. Where does the missing DDT go? Obviously, there are unknown sinks, S-I-N-K-S, sinks for the stuff. Perhaps it literally sinks to the bottom of the oceans. Another tangent of perhaps. Our Creator includes its breakdown as part of logistical grace. Logistical grace, clean water to drink and air to breathe. The important point is that most of the DDT produced does not end up in the food chain. If we are going to get wiped out by DDT poisoning, at least it's going to take a lot longer than we first feared. A lot longer than we first feared, which makes the farmers and the ministers of health and agriculture in the developing nations happy indeed, since they're more concerned with the immediate problems of controlling crop-eating and disease-bearing insects than in the longer range, but equally important, problems of DDT pollution. Pointing out dangers that everyone's ignoring is an important and vital task. And it's only natural that when you're staring a monstrous problem in the face and no one else is paying any attention to your predicament, your voice tends to get a bit shrill. But remember the tale of the boy who cried wolf. The real danger that the hand-wringers and the doom sayers, the doom criers have exposed us to is that we may be ignoring the actual dangers that we face because so many predictions of disaster have turned out to be false alarms. A few years ago, Professor Jay Forrester of MIT worked out a computer modeling technique for simulating the workings of a modern business firm. With his computer model, Forrester could vary certain aspects of a firm's operation, such as price, product line, acquisition of new property, etc., and see how the variations affected the overall company business. Before long, Forrester, page 177, the wait one. 177. Oh, all right, we're down to 2 pages remaining. I know. Forrester and his colleagues were applying the computer simulation technique to models of cities, to government agencies, and to the entire world. The technique was adapted by a group of MIT researchers led by Professor Dennis Meadows for an examination of the interrelationships of world population growth, industrial and farm output, pollution and natural resources, under the sponsorship of the Club of Rome, an international group of industrialists, the Club of Rome was an international group of industrialists, scientists, educators, civil servants. This world model's predictions for the future were published earlier this year in a book called The Limits to growth? Very simply, the study shows that disaster in spades is waiting for mankind within the coming century. According to the computer world model, if we don't change our growth-oriented society drastically, we will have used up all of our natural resources, produced so much pollution and overpopulated our planet so badly that the entire world society will collapse. Resources will run out. Food and industrial production will tumble. Death rate will climb out of sight. Mass starvation and presumably war. All this is shown on clear, inexorable-looking graphs. The curves for population, industrial production, farm output, and natural resources all peak early in the 21st century and then collapse. Super disaster. And it's very real if you grant two assumptions. Two assumptions. Oh well. Trust me, they sound like church bells, the indoor kind. Two assumptions. The first assumption is that our world society will not change. Given our free choice, we will continue to opt for more industrial production, no birth control, faster and faster consumption of our natural resources. This is a basic point that the MIT team wants to make, that we cannot continue to have a growing society. We must stop our drive for constant growth and stabilize our population, production, and consumption. The MIT team played as fairly as they could with the data. They produced computer runs in which world resources were doubled and even virtually unlimited pollution or population rises to bring on the disaster. Models with increased food production or voluntary birth control programs were also tried. They end in mass famine because the population always rises to eventually outstrip food production. All this begins to sound like Malthus in a computer, and we have a right to be wary, but granting the assumption that we make no fundamental changes in our society, the computer's rumblings must be taken very seriously. As a side issue, it seems that the MIT group didn't give much weight to the advent of nuclear fusion power, which will have, turn the page for the last time. Turn the page. The effect of enormously enhancing our available natural resources and reducing pollution drastically. The computer also shows models in which society has changed, where stability is the order of the day rather than growth. In these models, industrial production, food consumption, population, and pollution levels are all very stable, very level. Everybody has the same per capita food consumption and industrial production for as far out as the graphs go. But no matter how stable the world society, that sneaky curve showing natural resources keeps creeping downward. After all, the world has only a finite supply of natural resources, right? Of course not. Of course not. Which brings us to the second tacit assumption of the MIT group. They assumed that mankind is bound to planet Earth and only planet Earth. They assumed that our world is a closed ecological unit, but they ignored the fact that we have in our grasp the means to make an open-ended ecological system or at the very least, a system of enormously larger size and scope than the computer was programmed to consider. In fact, the real meaning of the MIT study is that we cannot exist much longer without opening up the solar system as a source of natural resources. The MIT people have produced the best argument for a strong space program that's ever been put on paper, and their book should be received with joy and dancing in the halls of NASA. Certainly, no sensible person would advocate a slash and burn rape of the solar system where we greedily rip out the natural resources we want without regard to the larger ecological questions. We've nearly destroyed ourselves on this planet with that kind of attitude. Let's not make the eventual disaster even wider. Clearly, we're in a race with disaster here on Earth, and equally clearly, we can forestall this disaster indefinitely by utilizing the resources of other worlds. Whether we will react quickly enough to win this race is a real and unanswered problem at this moment. If we don't use the resources of the solar system to prevent disaster here on Earth, what other alternatives are there? There are two, and only two: the disaster or a stabilized world society. Now, stability might look great to a computer, but to most human beings it means control, and not self-control either. State-imposed controls on food consumption, on jobs, on family planning. The world of the book 1984 may be a half century later than predicted, but just as gruesome nonetheless. The alternatives then are 1, worldwide disaster; 2, worldwide stability with its concomitant controls; or 3, expansion into the solar system and ultimately to the stars. Which would you choose? Signed, the editor of Analog Magazine. The editor of Analog, I'm sure, would be amazed and heartened to find that even his sober predictions have not come true. I referred earlier to the doctrine of logistical grace. It is by one Pastor R, as in R, B as in boy, Thieme, Thieme. He's all over the internet. He's dead now. His son carries it on. They're in the Houston area for what it's worth. Check it out. Logistical grace. What a concept. Peace out.